Nice.
Nice.
Stage. Yeah, you're on at the
Okay,
stage.
cool. All right, so thank you again for having me here. I'm excited to do another Hotwire Native kind of talk presentation. I think that my last one was at Rails World last year, where I gave the keynote on this, and not a lot has changed in the framework, but a lot has changed in like how I think about it and what Hotwire Native really like, not what it means, but more of what it means for Rails developers. So this talk will be a way of getting an introduction to what you can do with the framework, why it's the right choice or the wrong choice. And then I'm going to be showing a bit of a demo to show you how it works. And then I also have some stuff at the end that's tangential, but could be interesting for Rails developers. Uh, if you have a question or something is confusing or you want to dive deeper, either just unmute and start talking, totally fine, or use the Zoom, raise your hand. I think we can do that in this video uh, to just let me know that you have a question. Um, and I will answer as much as I can. As I mentioned earlier, I have code that we can look at together, that we can dive into, that we can analyze. So it's like once the talk is done, whatever direction makes sense for Q&A, I'm happy to go that way. All right. Um, so real quick, my name is Joe Masilotti. I am a mobile app consultant and author. I have a book published with pragmatic programmers called Hotwire Native for Rails developers, which we'll talk a little bit more at the end of this. And pretty simple. I'm here to help you take your Rails website from the browser to the app stores. And this talk will focus only on the code for iOS, but every pattern and technique that we learn today can be applied to Android. And a little hint into how I like to do mobile development is that I like building for iOS much more than I like building for Android. Yes, I have an iPhone, but also I just find the APIs and the Xcode better suited to how my brain works. So a lot of times I will write and build iOS stuff first and then ask Claude or another agent to be like, hey, what's the Android equivalent to this? And I think that that helps really well in terms of let's think about the product first and then see what tools are available. Because I don't have an Android phone, I don't know all of the new APIs or guidelines and all that stuff. So having an agent in there saying, oh, well, you have a tab bar, like UI tab bar on iOS. That's actually a bottom navigation view on Android. It's like, okay, those don't sound at all the same, but they actually solve the exact same problem. So I found that using an agent there to help me get along, it has been a really nice workflow for me. The big reason that Hotwire Native exists is that native app development is non-trivial. I have a couple reasons here, but the big thing is that to build a fully native app, you need to know a lot of different things. You need to know how to work in Android Studio and Xcode. You need to learn how to write Swift and Kotlin. Those are kind of those are manageable, especially now with LLMs. Like the actual writing of the code is not the hard part, and it still isn't the hard part. I think the bigger hurdle is that you now have three different code bases that have business logic. And sometimes, if you're going fully native, non trivial business logic. And that's where things, even with LLM, enhanced development, it means that you're just that much slower and it's that much more expensive, whether in terms of time or maintenance or just straight up tokens to update your apps because you have to make changes across three, sometimes four different places to get it working. Um, even something like a shortcut like React Native, you are still every feature change for the most part, you're deploying new versions to the app stores. So if you're not on a weekly or 2-week cadence with the App Store, you now can have bugs that are stuck behind Apple Review or Android or Google Review. Whereas with a more hybrid approach, those don't really happen. And those don't happen because of the magic of what Hotwire Native is. And what it is a web view. So I'm going to skip the demo for a sec and just talk about like the difference between a website and a mobile app, and then we'll look at what one of these actually looks like. So on the left, we have your kind of PWA mobile website. The entire thing is your mobile web browser. On your Hotwire Native app on the right, we take that exact content and shove it into an embedded web view. And then we can add native navigation bar at the top, native tab bar at the bottom, all these native features that add on top of it. But at the end of the day, like the core functionality is coming from your Rails server as HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And that enables just a ton of flexibility in how we build, what we deploy, and when we launch things. And I will show you a quick demo here of what a Hotwire Native app can look like. So here I have the iOS simulator. I have a local server running right now that is just a pretty standard server here, a Rails server. And we also have the website. So this is what we're going to be looking at. It's the desktop version. Feels very desktop-y. It's done with Bootstrap. We can click into things. We see some HTML. We have like a web-based type map screen. It's essentially a CRUD app, right? Like I can sign in, and then when I can sign in, I can actually do some editing flow. Pretty boring. Mobile web looks very similar. On iOS, when we translate this to Hotwire Native, we're getting a very similar experience here. So I'm going to put these side by side to show what we're actually looking like. This screen looks, well, pretty much exactly the same, except with the difference of this. We don't have the web-based nav bar right up here, and we have these native tabs instead. So when I sign in, you'll see I get this screen presented from the bottom as a modal to make it feel more like iOS with interactive swipe. I click sign in, and here I'm actually getting a native notification to say, hey, do you want to send push notifications to this device, which we can talk about in a minute. We get our flash messages, and now we even have a native button up in the top right. Same thing as we have on the web. We can push and pop things. We're talking native animation here, so we can even have the like slide to go back, which is pretty cool. Not a lot of the other web to mobile frameworks provide this, and this is one of the big benefits of Hotwire Native and making it feel like a native app is like I click a link, it pushes a new screen onto the stack. And here I will turn on slow animations for a second, and you'll see that this is like perfect because it is using the native iOS push and pop under the hood. We're not recreating this with like a web animation. This isn't JavaScript. This is iOS UI navigation controller calling push and pushing a new view controller onto the stack. What that means is that we get this title for free, this back button. Can I do it this slow? Yeah. Disappears automatically when we go back there, fades out. This fades in. Everything that we expect in a native app just works because we're building on top of iOS instead of hijacking iOS and trying to maybe do our own thing like, like Flutter or sometimes even React Native would. We can pull to refresh, of course. We'll fetch new content here. And we also have now this native button, which I've added to this screen. And we click that, we get this form that slides up from the bottom. So if the user doesn't want to care about it, they can just slide down to dismiss it. One of the big benefits here is that we are working in a web view still, right? So if I try to submit this form on the web, I would get a Rails-based error screen, flash message. Well, because this is HTML, we get the exact same thing on iOS. Now, this is a great example of something that looks very much web-based. And this is an example of where we'd probably want to add some custom native styling to make this feel a little bit more native. Uh, but it's like it's Rails, right? We can add a name, and then we'll just see this disappear because that is now validating correctly. We also get full access to the device's photo library. This is the native photo picker that comes with iOS. Everyone's used to how this thing works. And then we have that image there as well. That doesn't require any native code outside of an HTML input tag on your server and a single string to say why you need access to that on the device. So again, taking advantage of all the web stuff we can get to have this uploader just work. And there we have the image. It is now existing both, of course, in the iOS app, but also on the web because this was uploaded to our server through active storage. I didn't write any native code to handle this. Same thing we have with like the two different tabs. These are two different navigation stacks, just like a real iOS app. We can switch back and forth between these and maintain our stack. This isn't a web-based one down here. And these will, hint for later, they're two different web views as if you had two different tabs on your browser. So those do not stay in sync. We'll talk about how that works as we get further along in the kind of implementation of this. Last thing I'll show with the Hotwire Native demo is this map button. We talked about this on the web where we're showing this very obvious web-based OpenStreetMap here. Because we're in native world, we can hijack specific URLs and say, hey, instead of doing the normal web view stuff, show a native screen. So here we're actually using Apple Maps, you can see down here, as an embedded map, which means we get all the niceties of, a 3D map. We can spin it around, zoom in, zoom out. It's a embedded Apple map, and on Android, it would be an embedded Google map. All of this is now building on top of Hotwire Native, and we're kind of like bouncing out of the web-based world and into native world here. So this requires custom native code, but the hook to get into it is essentially, hey, did that URL end in /map? Because if so, present this screen. And we'll dive into that as well in a little bit. Before I move on, is there anything else in the demo that someone wants to see or questions about how the demo app and this Hotwire Native integration works at all? Feel free to just unmute and start talking or raise your hand.
If no one has.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, do I think them as like a web component maybe in terms of like a web development with each those native things I plug in and I just had like a renderer in a blog and just it becomes like that basically, or
more or less, yeah. The native stuff has there's three different ways of thinking about native components with Hotwire Native. One are the stuff that lives across the app, and that's like the tab bar. And there we're going to have custom code in iOS or Android that sets up the tab bar and then wraps the Hotwire Native integration. That's the first one. The second one is these native buttons that kind of augment the screen. And those are something called bridge components, which I'll talk about in the talk as well. And then we have fully native screens, which is this, and that's where we're hijacking Hotwire Native and then doing fully native code. There's no web version of like this outside of the HTML you see on the left. So it's like, does it exist outside of the web views? Then it's probably totally custom code. Does it live on top of the web view? That's probably a bridge component and kind of just like a web component that has native interaction. Or is it a screen, and then we're going to be building like a custom Swift UI or Jetpack Compose screen around it?
I have a question about pages. Let's say I have a blog website and I converted it to a mobile app with Hotwire Native. Let's say I have 100 blog posts in it. So when user starts reading my blog post, all the how you call tabs or screens, they will go on top of them, and will they be like a stack of slides?
Yeah, so anything that's available to the user on the web is available to them in the app. So if there's a link to it on the website, there's a link to it on the mobile app. And maybe this will help. If I inspect this, I'm actually inspecting now the mobile app here. You'll see that it is just the HTML under the hood. So this is actually just like rendering exactly what the browser would render, but with a couple different native decorations on top of it to make it look nice. Yeah, there we have one where we're actually hiding a Hotwire native element. And we'll get that to that a little bit later. Did that answer your question there?
Kind of, but you opened the sign up form, and it was like a like something. It's like I don't know what it is called, but it's not opening a new page, but it's like opening a new drawer or new slide. So if I have too many web pages, will they open like this always, or will they replace each other? Like when you switch from Forest Park to Mount Tabor, so
Yeah.
it's
So you
I
have,
think say like a
I
new
see what you're
tab.
saying there. Yeah, like kind of like the presentation options.
Mhm.
With Hotwire Native, you have three options. You have a push, which is the default, where if you click something, it slides in onto the stack and replaces the previous screen, and you get a back button. You have a present, which it slides it up from the bottom. And I like to think of I use these for forms or things where they're going to be opening it and then closing it, and that's it. They can't add stacks onto this. And then you also have something called replace, which would
Okay.
change the content of this screen without pushing something onto the stack. So a replace action here is actually when I click sign in, it's replacing this screen with the plus button and the sign out button rendered, fresh from the server, but it's not pushing this onto the stack again.
Okay, now it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to this. I think that this hopefully makes a little bit more sense here where we have, I'm going to hide this one, the nav bar up top, the tab bar down at the bottom, and then this whole thing here is a web view. And I think that I could even, like you can tell it's a web view when you start to do stuff like this, right? And it becomes very obvious. Or my favorite trick is to start highlighting text and seeing if it goes across boundaries. That's like a very obvious tell that this is built with web technologies. And we can fix those. We could actually hide those previews. We can disable text selection. But I like to keep it in for the demo to show that it's like, kind of like a, hey, is that built with native? No, definitely not. Let's get into some code here. This is how we would set up a iOS project. This would go into we create a brand new iOS project and we would copy paste this code in. This is directly from the docs on native.hotwire.dev. But this is all we need to start with an app with no tab bar at the bottom. So we're pointing here to our local host. We're creating a navigator, which is kind of like the thing that pushes screens or presents screens onto the stack. And then we're saying, hey, on this window here, put the navigator as the only thing you see and then start the navigator. So we worked as one of the maintainers of this library, we've worked very hard to get this as short as possible. You could copy paste this into a brand new Xcode project and have a pretty much working iOS app, in a couple minutes. It won't look great. We'll talk about that in a sec, but this is all we need to really get going. And then from here, you can start to customize this more and more. And this is coming from, like I said, native.hotwire.dev. The iOS has a getting started guide where we create a new project in Xcode, add the package, and then if you'll notice, this is the exact same code I just showed you. So this is a really good place to start if you wanted to try this on your own machine. And of course, there's one for Android as well. We'll switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about bridge components. And bridge components are native things that sit on top of our web content. And I don't mean on top of as in like, hey, this is a native button. I mean like they wrap the content, or they fire on click, or they interact with your native APIs in a way that HTML can't do. So you could build bridge components for getting the user's location, or sending them push notifications, or pulling up a native barcode scanner, all things that web either can do poorly or just can't do at all. Maybe access core ML, like stuff like that. And they all wrap around this concept of a bridge component, which has 3 pieces. It has HTML. Okay, so we're gonna be building this button right here. It has 3 pieces. It has HTML. So this is what you'd write in your Rails app in ERB, right? You'd have a link to the title of the button, the link of where you want it to go, and then here's how we decorate it. A data controller attribute with bridge --button. If you've used stimulus before, this should be obvious where this is going. This is wiring it up to a stimulus controller under the bridge directory named buttoncontroller.js. And that's how we'll actually wire this up and get it connected. The bridge component JavaScript, here we have, if you squint, you can tell that this is a stimulus controller. And that is correct because bridge component, which comes from the Hotwire Native Bridge library, is a subclass of a stimulus controller. So we get access to all the APIs that we normally would with a stimulus controller, but we also get access to a couple more attributes like title and disabled and bridge attribute. All of these, just straight up click. A couple of additional wrappers around that will help us. So we have this JavaScript here, and the first thing that we want to do is make sure that we identify it with a component name. This is how we'll match it up to the native code on iOS and Android. This one's called button. Here on connect, so when this element is shown in the DOM, we're going to run this code. We'll call super to call into stimulus and up the chain. We'll find the element that triggered this. So this is back to our actual button here. And we'll grab the title of it. Title is a bridge attribute that looks at like the content of an anchor tag. It looks at the title attribute of a button tag. It does all this stuff under the hood to find out what the most likely title is. And then we call this.send. This.send is our bridge into the native code. Here we're sending this hash or this object, title is element.title, down to the native code to say, hey, do something with this configuration, this title. We'll look at the native code in a sec. And then we provide a callback that when the native app responds to this message, we're going to click on this element. So what this means is that this button that exists in the DOM, or this link, when the user on the native side clicks the native representation, we're actually going to be clicking under the hood with JavaScript this link and visiting whatever HTML path or JavaScript component we've set up there. So we're not actually saying on the native side, like, oh, visit this URL. We're saying, hey, just click that element in the DOM and do whatever the DOM is supposed to do. So it's kind of like how stimulus controllers are supposed to be super generic. Bridge components are supposed to be even more generic in that they don't really tie to features, they tie to behavior, if that follows there. Finally, we have the Swift side of the bridge component. So again, we inherit from bridge component, the Swift object, and we then identify it with a name. Here we're calling it button. This is how iOS and Android know to wire it up to this JavaScript button from the JavaScript. And then we have one function we need to override, which is called onReceive. And this is called when a message is sent, when we fire this.send. Here we're listening for that message, we're extracting that title as a string, and then we're creating a bar button item on the right-hand side. And when it's clicked, we're replying to that message. So that creates kind of the full gap in there. We can set up breakpoints in the example app to make this make even more sense. But we now have a full to and from, a full cycle of how this works, where the Rails app, the JavaScript is saying, hey, send this title to the app. The iOS app is saying, cool, I'll add that as a button to the right side, and I'll attach an action. So when the user clicks it, execute this code, which replies, and then executes this JavaScript here, which clicks that HTML element. So again, Swift code, super generic here. All it's doing is saying, hey, create a button in the top right, name it this title, and when the user clicks it, we call connect, or we execute the JavaScript code. That's exactly what's happening for this plus button here. This is saying, hey, add a button to the right and use this name of an icon. When it's tapped, we're essentially clicking this button, which we've hidden in the app, but it's still there. If I hover over, if I do develop, you'll see that there is still that button. You'll see here that it's not highlighting because we've hidden it. It is hidden on the iOS app, but it is a button that goes to hikes new. So the iOS app is then going to say, okay, click that button. And what that does is route the hikes new path. And we don't have to worry about what the path is or where it goes. That's all handled just with, HTML, right? We're clicking a link. I always find bridge components to be a little hand wavy until you actually get in there and build one for yourself. The documentation has a really good walkthrough of building a bridge component, very similar to what I just talked about. You can walk through adding a profile button. Same thing, data bridge title, data controller. This is almost exactly what I just showed you. And then, of course, the iOS app is a little bit more because they want to handle left and right side. But for the most part, follow through this single page. And I think that bridge components will make a little bit more sense. And once you have the basics for bridge components, there are so many things that you can do with them. So this is my bridge component library that has a free, and just a heads up, a paid package. So some of these do require payment, but you can do native alerts, barcode scanners, biometrics locks. We talked about building that button component. Forms, so something when you click submit, it'll disable the submit button until Rails tells you that it's actually submitted. Vibrating through haptics, user location, NFC scanning. Any API that the iOS or Android library provides, we can hook into those with a bridge component. Because all we're doing is saying, when this button is clicked, execute this native code. And here, the native code is saying, add a native button to the screen. But the native code could also be saying, kick off a whole native document scanner, touch core ML and do some machine learning execution on the device, or send a push notification. It's an abstraction around executing arbitrary native code that is bundled in your app. Everyone with me so far there? Any questions or more examples that would be helpful before we move on? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry for interrupt. What is the meaning of plural? You showed the bridge components like barcode scanner component has a Pro badge. Why?
So the
What's
ones that are
Pro?
labeled Pro here, again, this is like my library. This is, so I like to use it as examples here. But the ones that are labeled Pro
Okay.
require a paid license
Okay.
there, a one-time payment just to use these drag and drop into your app. Like if you download this package, you add a package to your iOS, you add a gem to your server, and then you can just say like data controller, bridge alert, and you get all the functionality of these in your iOS and Android app. If you want to use the Pro components, the more nitty-gritty ones, the more advanced ones, you have to pay for the license too.
Okay. Got it. Thanks.
And these are just examples, right? Like these, you can build whatever you want. You don't have to use this package. You don't have to use this library. You could ask Claude or whoever to go off and say, I need a bridge component modeled after this that does X, Y, and Z custom for my app. And that will be great because Claude can write the native code kind of in one class. And then all you need to do is bridge it with the bridge component Swift thing to call into that native code or that native class or native library. For clients, I've also done this a lot with like analytics libraries, or they have maybe like an ad partner, and we can hook into those with bridge components because, again, under the hood, we're just executing whatever native code we want. Any more questions on bridge components before I move on?
I have a question. So let's say we publish our app to App Store, and so the plus button, as far as I understand, that plus button is a bridge component, right? So if I want to change that plus button, let's say maybe redirect to another URL, do I have to publish a new version to App Store, or just do I need to update my Rails code and deploy my code to, let's say, my
great
deployment
question.
service?
Yeah, so let's do this. So here is a real, for lack of a better word, bridge component, like not a demo one that you would build if you followed through with my app. And it adds that button to the top right. If you look right here, we're getting the image dynamically from the HTML, okay? And if we look at the code that powers this, you'll see here that we have data bridge iOS image name equals plus. So the way that this bridge component works is that if we change plus to any symbol that exists on the iOS device, we don't have to even rebuild the app. We can actually just, I'll show you here. So here we have bridge iOS image name is plus. I'm going to open SF symbols here, which is where these names come from. And we're going to randomly pick, well, not an arrow. Let's see, inset filled rectangle badge record. We're going to copy the name here, and we're going to change it like this. Now, when we pull to refresh this page, that icon is used now in the native app. We didn't have to submit a build to Apple. We could tell users, pull to refresh, and you'll get a new native button. That's kind of the magic of these bridge components, is that they're generic in a way that the server configures what the app should show, but the app is still responsible for the behavior and how it's routed. I say that because the same thing here, instead of going to the new hike path, maybe we hard code, hikes 3 or whatever, And now the link to this actually takes us directly to a specific hike instead of hikes new. So we can even change what it does because all of the configuration is in the HTML.
Wow, that looks amazing. But this is this valid for all components, or all or other components might have some, I don't know, interesting or different behaviors that cannot be done this way?
It all depends on how you build those components.
Anyway.
Yeah. So like the way that this component is built is that when it receives connect, it rebuilds the entire button on the top right or the top left of the screen. If you built it in a way that like it only added a button or something, you might run into problems when someone refreshes and gets a different type of button. So one of the reasons why I encourage folks to use my free library is because like I've done all this battle testing, I've used it for a ton of clients. But if you build your own stuff, modeling it after that, where we're always replacing stuff instead of adding, can make a big difference.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. I saw a hand raise. Maybe the question was answered.
Yeah, I so my question is, okay, we don't need to compile Swift app, but when we need to compile, what change in Rails app needs to compile and push our app to App Store?
If you're only changing code on your server, you will most likely not need to build a new version, compile, send a new version to the App Store. It's only when you're changing the native Swift or Android code that you actually need to send a new binary to Apple or Google. So a really good example here is like, I can take this button and put it on the hike show page, right? And now we have that button on a new page, somewhere else entirely different in our app, because it's all, again, HTML. So we can not only change existing components on pages that already have them, but we can add and remove them to different pages, all without recompiling or anything, because it's all HTML driven. If we decided that, hey, you know what? We wanted this to be on the left side. Well, now we've changed native code. This would require us to submit a new build to the App Store, rerun the app, go through Apple review just to get that button on the left side now. I would encourage that your component should probably take a parameter for left or right, and then you won't have to ever, like you make it as generic, even more generic. But yeah, so that's where that difference would come into play.
For navigations, we also need to deploy to App Store, right? If we want to change navigation, for example, we have two items in the navigation, hikes and hikers. Let's say if you want to add one more item, then we need to build the code and push to Apple, right? App Store.
Yeah, so in this code base, we have hard-coded the hikes and the hikers tabs, right? So if you wanted to add a new one, yes, you would have to recompile and submit a new version to the App Store. But this was built for simplicity. You could make this pull from the server, from like an endpoint, and say, hey, these are my array of tabs in JSON, and then dynamically create those. I usually do that for clients because they usually change that type of stuff. But in this particular example, yes, it would require a native change and deploy.
Like how much can I push this? Like, can I build meta components that build dynamic components, for example? Will that like cause problems with the Apple or like the app stores, basically?
I've submitted close to 30 apps with Apple at this point with Hotwire Native. And I have never once been rejected because Apple is like, hey, this is obviously a web view, or B, hey, you're doing too many dynamic things in the app. The way I look at it is like Apple is mostly looking at the content. And every page is looking very different because it's coming from your Rails server. So if this little thing changes a little bit here and there, they don't really notice it, let alone care that it's changing. To them, this is all native code. And again, like this is only from past experience, but I've never had Apple come back and say, you're abusing this because you're not breaking the rules. All of the native code that's getting executed on the user's device has to be in the bundle, in the compiled binary. You're just deciding when to call that code or if. You're never like eval Swift code, you know what I mean? So you're actually pretty safe. Well, very safe, actually.
Is there any limitation for web views? Like you cannot do this, you can do this. For example, can I put an iframe in it or something like that?
You can put iframes in it. I think that Turbo plays weird with iframes, so I'd have to check that, like Turbo.js, because that's required for Hotwire Native. The big limitation that I've experienced is that service workers and offline stuff that works on like mobile Safari can sometimes often not work in the embedded web view on iOS. Other than that, you have the full JavaScript acceleration. It uses the GPU, like performance is there. Service workers and offline background type stuff is really the only limitation I've seen. And that's getting better with each version of iOS.
I faced a problem with a picker component. In my app, I'm using the native ones, so it's worked well in the browser and the iOS. But I want to change it because I faced with the language problem when I changed to Turkish to English. They are not changing because of they are native. They are getting the language config from the device.
Mm-hmm.
So the Cloud Code suggests me to using other JS frameworks like Fletcher or something. So, but when I use it, I had to use many stimulus code. So now I cannot control. For example, I push my app to LinkedIn, and user write a comment. Your birthday starts in the future. We can enter the future. So I put the HTML thing, and I put something on HTML. It worked well, but in the browser, in the iOS, it didn't work because it's not native. So I couldn't make it. So now it's a bug in the iOS app.
And this is for a picker, you said?
Yeah, date picker and is the date picker, but the default one I'm using.
Yeah, and the like default one that you get out of the box isn't good enough.
Yeah, it's enough, but I cannot control. When I added limit, for example, I can add the controls in the HTML, so not using the feature, but it's not working on the iOS app.
Yeah.
So I have to use third libraries like Fletcher or something like this. So which is need to write more CSS code or something like this. Maybe I can share with you or with you guys later.
Yeah, to be honest, or it feels like iOS isn't respecting that end date or whatever, like no future dates. And if I were you, I would just accept that the form is invalid and then validate it on the server and then come back and be like, error message, you can't select future dates. Like that.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that you can fight the framework so much with with Hotwire Native and iOS that it becomes this trade-off of I've had apps that one little nuance of the iOS framework accounted for 90% of the native code that we wrote for the entire project. Everything else was just the generic code that runs Hotwire Native, but they had one little thing of like auto-selecting a field on load that took 90% of the code in the code base. And it's like, if they didn't care about that one little thing, we would have shipped, I think, 2 months earlier. And that's the type of trade-offs that like you want to get an MVP out the door quickly and then can polish. But everyone has different product managers and all that stuff.
Yeah, so there is a question from Typhoon. I think, yeah, he's driving. So he wrote this question. Maybe I can read you, or do you see the chats?
Yeah, I see it. Thank you. So
Okay, no worries.
iOS looks really mature. Do we get the same comfort on Android, or have you run into cases where bridges doing the same job need platform-specific tweaks, or where you had to make iOS Android distinctions on the Rails stimulus side? I would say that iOS and Android are about parity in terms of like how mature they are, in terms of like the frameworks themselves, both very mature. The integration of Hotwire Native with iOS and Android is pretty close to feature parity as well. So it's rare that you'll write custom JavaScript or something for iOS and Android. It's more likely and highly likely that your native implementation will be more complex on Android written in Kotlin than your iOS code was written in Swift. And that's kind of the nature of just like iOS Swift versus Android Kotlin. Like this file you're looking at right here, this bridge component, I think is 2, maybe 3 times longer on Android because it is a more verbose language. And they also have not done the best job of like backwards compatibility for stuff. So you have to handle a lot of different like version number checks and things. But that's kind of just the way it is with Android development. And the good thing about that is that there are a lot of existing resources on just like core Android development. How do I do the X, Y, or Z that exists online for your LLMs to reference or for you to read on defunct websites? I hope that answered the question there. I have just a few more slides here. So let's work through this next one. This is the extension point for how to get that map screen that we talked about. If you wanted to build out a native Swift screen, so we're talking here with this native map, we hook into the navigator delegate here and we call handle. Each proposal is essentially when a user clicks a link. It has a property on it called view controller, and we can just kind of switch on that. And if we decide that we want to show a map screen, we can return this custom enum called accept custom with a view controller with like a Swift UI view or whatever. Otherwise, we want to just let Hotwire Native take over. So this is where we would like inject code and say, hey, when a user clicks this type of link, eject out of Hotwire Native. I now have control as the developer. Recommendation to keep these maintainable is to keep these few and far between, usually only as leaf nodes of your navigation stack. It's tricky to go from native. It's easy to go from web to native. It's a little bit harder to go from native back to web. So if my map screen had a link to go to like somewhere else, it's actually a little bit trickier because we don't have this pattern set up. It's all kind of on your own there. So I like to make sure that these are either leaf nodes or like home screen type things that you'd want to cache and stuff like that. This is a quick example of what the progress of going from like, hey, I just slapped Hotwire Native on my Rails app looks like on the left, to then progressively enhancing it to be more native feeling all the way through to the right. So if we look at the left, right up at the top, we see that we have this like super long native title. And a quick fix for this is that the HTML title tag is what sets this on every single page. So if we just change the HTML title tag, we get it looking really nice. You'll also see here that we've hidden a lot of this web-based navigation, the H1 tag, stuff like that, to just kind of clean up the top because we have a native nav bar already. Why duplicate our H1s twice? And then here we're going from just like web-based cleanup to actual native cleanup, where we're adding a native tab bar, which we talked about, and then 2 different button components here. So now we're back to having full parity with the first screen, but it feels and looks a lot more native than something than if we had just like, slapped our mobile web view in a Hotwire native wrapper. And the core of this comes down to 2 different things: bridge components, which we talked about, and then this little bit of HTML, CSS here. So this is 3 code snippets: our application layout, our application CSS, and then an example show template file. Up at the top, we're checking if the app is a Hotwire native app. That helper comes free with Rails, actually. We're going to add a data Hotwire native attribute to the body tag. This is going to identify our Hotwire native apps. So in our Tailwind CSS, we can add a custom variant called Hotwire native. Now, anytime we have the body data Hotwire native tag, we can apply custom code here. This now creates a variant in Hotwire native like SM : or MD : called Hotwire native : Here we're saying Hotwire native : hidden, which now hides this H1 tag only in the Hotwire native apps. We get full access to all of Tailwind CSS's, MT-1 for margin top, or PX0 for, horizontal pixel scaling. We've created a full variant that gets baked into our CSS with just maybe 5 lines of code here, but it can become really powerful because we don't have to sprinkle our HTML with if-else statements. We're just saying, hey, treat the native app as a variant, just like you would responsive web design, and use Hotwire native : to then hide or show or nudge pixels around as needed. This is one of the biggest tips I have for keeping a maintainable Hotwire native app, because you'll very quickly start to sprinkle this, and I consider that a smell if I see this in your view. I would much rather have stuff done with CSS. It especially will make your caching layer more happier because you don't have to cache 2 versions of things. If you're using Russian doll caching, this will cache, outside of the Russian doll, and everything else will be inside. And if you don't like this being outside of the cache, you could have this done through JavaScript on the page load. So it would inject that data attribute for you, and you actually can cache the full content in your caching layer. Powerful stuff with this. I recommend you abuse this for lack of a better term. This is big.
So when you're saying about the caching, I made a question. Can we, for example, I have an app, so it has a server and database, but I want to use for the iOS app, I want to use my local database, not the server database. Can I do this with Hotwire?
So local meaning in like a service worker or a SQLite file that you're shipping with the app?
Phone database. Just phone. I want to use the data in the phone, not on the remote database like my app server is using. Just maybe some data, not all of them. Maybe it's I need some special data, and I would like to keep them in the local database, in the machine database.
I don't know. I've never done that.
I don't know.
Then maybe experimenting.
Maybe it's a silly question. There's no scenario in the world yet. But I just while we are talking about the caching, I made it. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Sorry. If you figure it out, do let me know, because that is interesting. Okay, so I have one more slide before kind of like open Q&A here. And I just wanted to quickly talk about Ruby native. And Ruby native is my personal take on Hotwire Native. It's kind of like what I wish Hotwire Native was. And the pitch for it is that imagine if you could do native apps without ever opening Xcode or ever opening Android Studio and configure the entire app through a YAML file and HTML. So all of your bridge components are already built in. You want to add tabs to the bottom? Well, you add this array to a YAML file on your server, and then boom, you get those 4 tabs. You want to change your tabs, you change this file, you relaunch the app, you get new tabs. Push notifications, OAuth, just like what if everything was bundled into the product instead of making you do it on your own? Here, I'm showing the example app. All of this, or this little bit of configuration, plus some HTML attributes, got me this demo app that you can play with if you go to rubynative.com. It solves a different problem. Like if you want to build your iOS and Android code base, if you want to do stuff that's custom or have native screens, Hotwire Native is and will always be the better choice. But if you just want to like wrap your website in a pretty good looking native shell and add some native components, Ruby Native could save you a whole lot of time and tokens and just like frustration dealing with deploying and all that stuff. Like it handles all the deploying to Apple and Google and everything for you. It is a paid product, of course, so I'm not going to talk about it for too much because I don't want to sell this, but I think that it is worth calling out as a viable alternative if you're just like, look, I don't want to touch native at all. Can like someone or something just do it for me? Check out Ruby Native. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised there.
Just one question about that because I have been using Ruby Native, so I wonder, and me and my friends Özgür and Tayfun talk about it. I wonder how you manage the Swift code, because when we run the Ruby Native in our local, you're creating a Cloudflare link. So probably there's a machine is compiling an Xcode. So how are you doing it if it's not a secret?
So the secret with Ruby Native is that every single customer's code base that gets deployed to the App Store is the exact same code base. The native code that runs on every new Ruby Native app is exactly the same, with 1 or 2 changes for like the name of the app and the bundle ID. So if you want push notifications, great. Push notifications are already bundled inside of your app. If you don't want push notifications, cool. You just don't use those features, but the code is still inside of your app if you ever want to use them in the future. So when you spin up that Cloudflare worker, it's just running the demo app code, which is the same for every single person in the world. It's just that you configured your server differently, so the demo app looks and feels different to you versus when I use it on my machine. That make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But so if I understood correctly, everyone is using same code at the end of the day.
Yep.
I was thinking you are upping a machine for every customer. So it's just okay. Makes sense. I don't know. So
yeah. So when you go to, here's my Ruby Native account, right? When I go to like deploy to iOS here, it will kick off a GitHub action that will actually compile my credentials, my name, all of that into my bundle that then gets uploaded to the App Store. But if you're just using that demo app with the Cloudflare worker, like this example demo app is the same for everyone because it has all the features it needs. So when I open it and point to my demo app, I see this. But if you point it to your demo app, you see something totally different.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I see.
And yeah, the question of, is this like expo.dev for React Native? It is very similar to Expo. Yeah, it's pretty much modeled after how Expo works with the Hotwire Native twist because it's built on top of Hotwire Native. So you get all those native transitions. You can see here we have like the modal sliding up from the bottom, tab bar, drop downs. Like we have a ton of features that you can add, and all of that is done through just HTML once you have your build live because it's all bundled into the binary as we were talking about. Okay, happy to talk more about that later or offline, but I just want to close with a quick thank you for having me here. This was a lot of fun. We got into some interesting topics there. If you want to learn more about this, check out my website. That QR code goes to my website. There's a link up at the top for the book. If you use this code, everyone here gets 40% off the book if you buy the PDF directly from my publisher. They were gracious enough to give me one of those for this. So definitely check that out if you're interested in the book. The book walks through how to build a Hotwire native app for iOS and Android from scratch. It's that demo app that I showed earlier. And if you want to follow me on socials, I'm Joe Masilotti everywhere. For those that can't see the screen, the coupon code is Ruby Turkey. I don't think capitalization matters, so don't worry about that. And yeah, I'll stick around for any more questions, but thank you very much for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I'm excited to see if anyone builds anything. Send me an email or at me on socials. I'd love to see what you're doing with Hotwire Native. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. That was a great talk, and thank you very much for discount. Yeah, I think I ask my questions to interrupt your talk. So if you have any questions, I can ask, I think.
Cool. Yeah, if anyone else has questions about Hotwire Native, how I'm building it, Ruby Native, I got another maybe 10, 15 minutes to stick around, and then I got to drop.
Hi, I have a question if you like.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Is the voice and everything clear?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the presentation and organizing this such a good event, and I appreciate it. I wonder that when I'm designing the mobile and the web experiences, the paradigm, honestly, when I'm thinking, I'm concerned about them when I'm designing the mobile views. And I'm concerning more about the screen sizes, and the paradigm is kind of very different in my mind, in my mindset. And honestly, I don't want to use another client-side MVC framework. So I like to stick in the server side, as always. But I also don't want to mix my views. I don't want to design my mobile screens concerning about the web users. It might be the entire pattern, but I wonder if can I separate my views and controllers for separately for my mobile app. So my business logic lives in the model layer, as always, but I want to separate the controllers and views for mobile and the web versions. Is it a good idea or just and a misunderstanding of the concept?
I mean, I like to keep as much code like as I don't want to say dry because it's actually not that's the wrong word, but I don't like to duplicate that type of stuff across different screens. But if you are needing to do that, like everything is contained in your models and all your controllers are doing is like switching things, check out request variants. That's a first party thing from Rails where you can do stuff like show.html.erb plus mobile or like plus native. And it will actually use that partial or that template over the default one if it exists. So you could then identify all requests from the Hotwire native app to use the plus native template. And then anytime it rendered a view, it would look for the plus native template or partial first. And if it wasn't there, fall back to the default one. So that means you can totally customize your views just for Hotwire native apps on a view layer. Controller layer, you can then use the respond to block to do custom logic there as well. I don't know about using a separate like Hotwire native controller versus a default controller. That would require something custom, probably at the routing layer. I'm thinking like a generic catch-all route that would check the user agent, or maybe even a middle layer, a middle tier. What's it called? A middleware layer that did that routing. I've never done that, but I have used request variants in the past, and they work for what they are. They work really well. A good example is like, I want a totally custom sign-in screen for native apps. Like, yeah, thank you for that link. Variants are really helpful for that.
All right, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Anyone else? Okay, I think I can stop the record.